Hello, and welcome to Music for All, a podcast brought to you by the Coalition for Music Education in Canada. My name is Christina Acton, my pronouns are they, them, and I'm currently a Master of Music student at Memorial University of Newfoundland and Labrador. Today, I have the absolute pleasure of speaking with Emily Steers. Emily, how are you?
Thank you, Christina. I am doing very well. So, yes, my name is Emily Steers. I use she, her pronouns, and I am based in Guelph, Ontario.
Awesome, thank you. So now that we've gotten the ball rolling a little bit, please tell us a bit about yourself.
So, Christina and I met each other while we were doing our Bachelor of Music at Mount Allison University. We both studied
Woohoo!
voice. So I was a graduate of 2019, so I very neatly dodged going to Zoom University there. Although I did get to experience a little bit of Zoom University because I then went and did my master's degree in community music at Wilfrid Laurier, which is why I'm now based in Ontario. And that was fabulously fun, albeit, with a slight disruption with the pandemic. I'm sure you can imagine that doing community music in that time was a little bit of a challenge.
Yeah, I bet.
And ever since then, I have been teaching. I have a home studio here in Guelph, which is where you find me now, for those of you watching on video. And outside of teaching, I also teach at a studio in Waterloo. I run a children's choir at a local church. I sing in local opera companies and choirs whenever I get the chance, and take the various and sundry odd jobs where I can get them. Life of a freelance musician is you take what you can get, and we wear many, many different hats.
Yeah, I was gonna say, I feel like even describing all that, you have like barely scratched the surface of the stuff that I've seen you do since graduation.
I am skimming the surface, otherwise we'd be here all night.
Well, what role did music play in your life growing up?
So, this is a very interesting question because I think music played a lot of different roles in my life. I grew up in church, and music was obviously a huge, huge part of service, of worship. And I always grew up singing and participating in the church youth choir. And then when I was old enough, I joined the adult choir. And part of the reason I decided to go into music professionally was that uh, the church I was attending at that time offered me a generous stipend to encourage youth participation in music and making music a priority. So I was able to actually make some coin
Nice.
singing in church choir, which was absolutely fabulous and was a real encouragement to me as a young musician. I was also very fortunate to have a really wonderful music educator when I was in elementary school. We had really rich music education, and I participated in children's choirs where I had the chance and did private singing lessons, and just music was always part of our life at home. Um, there are videos. There are many videos that my mother has of me and my brother when we were younger, dancing around the kitchen, making breakfast for ourselves before we went off to school, singing Moulin Rouge or The Lion King or Rent at the top of our lungs. She said it was always a very nice thing to come home to in the evenings, was me and my brother cooking dinner for ourselves and belting out show tunes.
Aw.
In terms of the impact it's had, I mean, obviously, I am a professional musician now, so it has had a huge impact on me growing up and knowing and being encouraged that this was something valuable and worth pursuing. And I have to give immense credit to my music teachers who saw something in me and said, "Yeah, you have a lot of skill, you have a lot of dedication, you should absolutely pursue this seriously." I've benefited immensely from music, from the connections I've made all across the country and all around the world, and the massive impact that having a studio has had, and just what a personal goal that has been, and how fulfilling it is to be able to work in music education in the capacities that I've been able to work.
Yeah, that is so fantastic. Was there a personal or emotional or like physical or spiritual benefit, do you think, that like music had at all as you were growing up?
Yeah, I mean, as I say, I grew up with music in the church, and music was always part of how I experienced divinity. Um, Not always in the most traditional ways. I remember listening to an Evanescence song when I was like 16 and going, this is about God. But yeah, absolutely, music is so foundational to my experience of religion, of faith, um, but also, there's so many tangible benefits from music outside of just my experience of spirituality in music, which is there is no better way, I maintain, there's no better way of meeting people and making actual genuine connections than working together to get a performance ready.
Yeah, absolutely. Was there, I think you've touched on this a little bit already, but I'd love to dive a little deeper. Was there a specific moment or a series of moments when you first knew that you really wanted music to be your career?
Yeah, it was a bit of a domino effect. When I was in grade 12, I remember thinking, okay, now what? Because I really loved science. I was quite good at it. I Cell biology was something that had really interested me and excited me from when I was in grade 9 and we first got to play around with microscopes. I was like, oh, and I still love it, and I still try to keep up with a lot of science communication and all of that kind of stuff. But so grade 12, I was really on the precipice of, okay, science, music, science. What do I want to go into? And there were kind of a series of things that happened that really pushed me towards music. Um, One was uh, the decision to apply to Mount Allison. Because Mount Allison has a flexible degree program. It's really easy to DIY your own degree at Mount A. This is becoming a Mount A shout out. Um,
Not sponsored.
Not sponsored, but shout out to Mount Allison. Um, but yes, Mount Allison has a really flexible degree program that um, I figured, well, I can try music for a little bit and see how I like it, and if it's not what I want to do or I don't feel like it's the right fit for me, it's really easy for me to switch streams.
Mm,
Or I could do a double degree and do both, or do one for a bit, do the other, go back and forth. Like that customization was available, and it wasn't going to be a huge issue for me to do that. The other thing that was absolutely a factor was my teacher. Um, my family was going through a bit of a financial rough spot in 2013, which is when I was thinking about applying to schools and figuring out what I wanted to do. And I told my teacher, my private voice teacher at the time, I said, this has been great and I really loved working with you, but we don't have the money right now for me to continue taking voice lessons as much as I would love to. And she basically said to me, nah. I was like, what do you mean? And she said, no, you are too talented. You have so much potential as a musician. I don't want money to be the thing that holds you back from pursuing something that I know you really love. And so I wasn't working at the time, or I had my church job, which was fantastic, but wasn't gonna pay the bills.
yeah.
But she said, well, you're not working very much right now, so what if you come work for me? And she had just had a baby, and she says, what if you look after the kid while I'm teaching lessons, and we'll call that an exchange. You do 3 hours of babysitting and we'll call that 1 hour of lesson, and that'll be a fair trade.
Wow.
And I cannot emphasize enough how much of a difference that made to me. That was the thing that made me go, oh, I guess maybe this is feasible. Because I'd kind of resigned myself. I was like, well, I guess I'm not going to do music. I'm going to do science because money has decided the answer to that
Hmm.
question. And she stepped up and said, no, I'm not going to let that be a barrier for you. And I'm grateful that she was in a position to be able to offer that,
Hmm.
and that I was in a position to be able to receive that.
Yeah.
So that was incredibly meaningful. Shout out to Marion Samuel Stevens.
Yeah, wow. That is so kind. But like you're right. It's such a wonderful thing to be able to continue to encourage a young person like that because
Mm-hmm.
I was in my first year when you were in your fourth year at Mount Allison, and by that point, I mean, I'm sure much earlier than that, but at the very least by that point you were so well established as like a staple in the musical community at Mount A, and somebody who everybody really like looked up to and relied on and trusted, that I can't imagine a world in which you weren't there.
Yeah, it's very weird to think about. I also want to, again, this is turning into the Mount A plug fest, um, but another shout out to Mount A is their very very generous entrance scholarships,
Mm-hmm.
um, and also because it is a smaller school, the personable interactions I was able to have. Like, I applied to some of the bigger music schools, and I had a really miserable time where they just were very incommunicative. They didn't answer my emails, or they would tell me things really late and really last minute. And it was a very frustrating experience. And they didn't offer me very much scholarship money because, they're much more competitive. They have a lot more people. It's a smaller, it's the same size pool of money for a much bigger pond of fish. But Mount Allison was able to offer me a really, really generous entrance scholarship that made a massive, massive difference with my financial situation being what it was at the time. And I was able to graduate with very little debt, because of the generous scholarships that I received there.
Mm-hmm. That's
And that
great.
made a massive difference. And I want to emphasize what kind of a difference just receiving a scholarship can make to children's and teens ways that they perceive themselves. It's like, oh, me and my music and my abilities are worth $4,000. Wow. People
Yeah.
want to give me $4,000 to pursue music. That's incredible. And what that does for your self esteem and your perception of yourself as an artist, as a musician, as you go forward in your career, it's absolutely phenomenal. It's so, so huge.
I don't know how varied your private studio students are currently in terms of like age and ability, but
Cool.
the I have a funny feeling the answer is vast. Um,
6 to 70, baby.
that's so awesome. That's fantastic. But have you had to, or not had to, have you gotten the opportunity to write any like scholarship reference letters for any of your students or see any of them receive that support?
Yeah. Well, actually, so I was able to pay it forward what Marion did for me. A student was going through a rough time and had to take a break from lessons, and I said, "Hey, you know what? Like, let's do an in-kind trade here." And she was able to do a lot of really, really cool projects and audition and get into some really, really cool shows. And I'm incredibly proud of her. So that's a really meaningful thing to have been able to pass on. But yeah, I've got a very varied studio, and I have another student who's off to college to do acting for theater and television, and I was able
Ooh.
to help her get some auditions ready, which was very exciting, just to see that off. And I know I have a few students this year who are starting to think about, okay, what does an audition list look like? And I'm like, all right, let's start preparing your audition materials. Let's get a set list going and get you into some competitions. So we're building up your resume. So it's very exciting to see them kind of on the same precipice that I was 8 or 9 years ago. Yeah, 9 years ago.
Whoa. That is how time works, eh?
That is indeed how time works.
So
I
yeah,
mean, I'm sure
actually,
many people listening to this podcast are going to go, 9 years ago. Try 30.
hey, it's still it's it's a long enough, it's a short enough distance that the fact that it is as long as it is still feels surprising. Does that sentence make sense?
Yes. Yep. Yeah, I know exactly what you mean.
Um, and actually, I do want to ask a little bit about your studio and your private lessons. So you
Yes.
that huge range of ages.
Hmm.
And I imagine, as far as I've seen on your social media, is a wide variety of like genres and sort of things that you
Yep.
prepare your students for. So yeah, tell me a bit about your students, anonymously, obviously, but
Yes. So my students are lovely. Basically, my restriction for taking private lessons is I'm like, you need to be able to read. If you can read and sound out words, you don't need to be super literate, but just basic reading comprehension is kind of where I start. Um, so that tends to be around the age of 6. And then that goes all the way up to people who are in their um, I think my oldest student that I've had was in his 70s. It's very exciting because I get to witness, like from a vocal pedagogy and vocal science standpoint, I get to witness voice in all of these different life stages, and menopause and later life and post childbirth and all of these kind of very very different life stages. Puberty obviously being the big one, and just being a kind of companion to folks on their vocal journey wherever they are in life. And really, my approach isn't terribly different. Obviously, we do slightly different songs with the 8-year-olds than the 42-year-olds, but there is a lot of overlap in how I approach because we're all beginners. And I think there's actually a lot of fear as an adult beginner about, if I'm not good at something now, I shouldn't try to get good at something.
Mm,
I shouldn't try to pick up something new because I'm in my 30s, 40s, 50s, etc.
mm,
So what's the point of trying something new, especially, I'm learning basic rudiments of theory, and this is what your 8, 9-year-old students are learning, and it's embarrassing that I don't know this. And I really feel for them because yeah, it's so hard to try something new. It's so intimidating, especially as an adult. And I feel incredibly privileged and incredibly grateful to them for trusting me with that vulnerability. I think that's something, as music educators, that we are deeply, deeply privileged to witness, is this incredible vulnerability from people in all stages of life. Teenagers obviously are a very special case. They're at a unique vulnerability, but we never stop being vulnerable, and it's an incredible thing to be trusted with that vulnerability and given the gift of openness and self-discovery. I'll also say I have quite a few trans students, and that's a whole other layer of intimacy and vulnerability and trust that I am being given by my students, because voice can be a tremendous source of dysphoria, and people coming to me and wanting to find joy in their voices again. Some of them, after having not sung at all or not sung since they've come out, it is such an incredible gift. Or walking with people on their journey through HRT and, working with trans men as they drop down through the octaves. I had one trans student who his voice dropped, and he said, "Oh no, I have to learn how to read bass clef." And I'm like,
yeah.
"Yes, sorry, buddy.
Oh,
Them's the breaks."
the unfortunate repercussion.
The unfortunate repercussions. It was totally worth it. He had a gorgeous baritone voice, but
Oh, excellent.
it was a hilarious, hilarious realization when I gave him a piece in bass clef, and he went, "Wait a second, hold on."
What do these notes mean? What do you mean it's not face? This is very loosely related to something you mentioned earlier, and I mostly mentioned this because I want to tell you about it, and I think you'd find it interesting, and I don't want to forget.
Yeah, go for it.
But one of my friends in the master's program here just did a really, really cool research project where she talked to brass players who have given birth and how that
Hmm.
affects their performance and their brass playing. And it was like all this research to do with the pelvic floor, which obviously would also impact singing.
Mm-hmm.
And it's really cool to see the kind of research that people are getting into that hasn't been done yet, because historically, you know, people always thought of people who gave birth as women, and why would we ever do any research to benefit women when we could benefit all of our male brass players?
Yeah.
Um,
Or
but
just
it's
just not
fascinating.
even being considered as a subject of study. I know there has been some interesting research lately into um, opera singers and recovery after giving birth, which is fantastic research, and I need to do more about it because I am not super familiar with all of the science about it, but it is absolutely incredibly transformational. I mean, that's the thing I always say is voice is you. You are your voice, and everything that affects you affects your voice. If you are
Hmm.
undergoing stress, if you are experiencing turbulent emotions, if you are going through hormonal fluctuations or whatever the case may be, it's all going to show up in your instrument in a really visceral way, and the voice is going to reveal everything that's going on with you.
Yep.
One thing I noticed recently back in June when we had, for those in Southern Ontario, you will remember that June was a smoky season.
Mm.
And for many parts of the country, we are recording this in August. For many parts of the country, it is still a smoky season.
Hmm.
And it was fascinating watching and talking to all of my students as they were coming in and noticing immediately, oh, I can hear this. I can hear the difference in people's sounds as they're experiencing wildfire smoke. And so, having all of these conversations about how to mitigate the impacts of smoke and mitigate the impacts of air pollution and how to keep yourself safe, wearing N95 masks when you're going outdoors, running air purifiers, getting HEPA filters, or building your own box fan air purifiers, all of those things. But just it was just such a visceral reminder of how interconnected everything is, because the voice is us, and everything we experience and everything the world around us is experiencing, it all shows up in our
Hmm.
instrument. It all shows up in our music.
Yeah. I always remember, this might be a little TMI. I remember when I was studying with Minette Gould during my undergrad, and by my fourth year, I would go into a lesson and she would go, Christina, you're gonna start your period in a day or two. And she could just like tell by
Yeah.
by how I was
Yeah.
singing. She'd
Yeah.
be like, if you're not already on it, it's coming soon.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. I tend not to say anything to my students, but I'm just like, did you know? Did you know that this is something that will really affect your voice? And they go, really? And I go, mm-hmm. They say, interesting. And I just kind of leave it at that. If they want to share more, they can. Um,
Put the ball in their court.
well, and the other thing that I always love chatting about with, especially my teens who are going through an estrus puberty, as opposed to a testosterone puberty, people don't think about estrogen as an estrus puberty causing vocal change.
Hmm.
And so few music teachers, especially like even a lot of voice teachers, don't know about how puberty affects the voice when it's not the very dramatic change that testosterone brings on. Everyone knows about that massive voice drop, but the estrus puberty cycle really can dramatically affect the voice. And so many teachers don't know, and so they think, these poor, a lot of them being teenage girls, um they're just like, oh, teenage girls, they just all have this like really breathy and raspy voice. And I'm like, no, that's literally a voice change. It's literally like they're not just being like breathy and ditzy. They're trying their best here.
Yeah.
And it's slightly infuriating. Again, like research into the non-testosterone based hormonal fluctuations is just so lacking. It's so
Mm-hmm.
frustrating, and the education about that is so lacking and so limited.
Yeah. This is I think related. I think this is a decent
It's a
segue.
tangent.
Is there any part of either your like current career and teaching or your previous research and studies that you are like always really, really excited to talk about?
Oh, I mean, you know the dangers of asking a master's student, "Hey, tell me about your research." Um, I am very seriously contemplating going back and doing a PhD just for the pure reason of I want to do this research. I want this research to happen.
Yeah.
So my master's research, I'll plug it a little bit here. As I say, my master's degree was in community music at Wilfrid Laurier, and my project was on queer choral community. So, what kind of community space is created in an LGBTQ choir that is different? Because everybody here listening, I am sure, knows about how important music space is and music communities are. Be it the band or the symphony or the rock band in your garage or your community choir, whatever the space is, you know how important that musical community can be and how uplifting and important that is for so many people. And I wanted to go, okay, well, we've got oodles and oodles and oodles of research talking about how important choir is for mental health, for physical health, for social connectedness. What happens when that choir, when the raison d'etre for that choir is not just, hey, we want to come sing together, we want to make music together, but we are all part of a marginalized community and we are seeking family, we are seeking community, we are seeking affirmation of our identity that we are not finding elsewhere in our community. And it was a fascinating project. And if I were to do a doctorate and someone give me grant money, this is this
Somebody
is a call for
listening.
universities to recruit me.
Somebody be
Recruit
Emily
me and give
Steers' patron.
yes. Give me your shirt grants. Um, but if I were to do a larger scale project, I worked with the Rainbow Chorus of Waterloo Wellington here in Guelph, looking at the impact it's had on the local Guelph community and how it has impacted the lives of members of the choir, past and present here in Guelph and in the surrounding area. If I were to do this, I would want to do it on a Canada-wide scale and see how has the queer choral movement that has been in force since the 1980s, how has this incredible music and political movement transformed the landscape for LGBTQ people in Canada? What has the impact been on LGBTQ rights, on communities where these choirs have taken root, whether they're still around or whether they're brand new choirs? What has the impact been? What are the ripple effects of these community music spaces?
That's so cool. Uh, what what cool research. Like
I know, and I was very, very lucky to be able to go and present my master's research at the Unison Festival in Halifax this past summer, which was amazing. Unison
wow.
Festival is the quadrennial gathering of LGBTQ choirs from all over Canada. From the host choir this year was the Women Next Door, which is a small a cappella women's chorale, all the way to the Vancouver Men's Chorus, which is 200 strong and mighty and fabulous, and the oldest queer choir in Canada, and everything in between.
That's
And
so cool.
it was so amazing to be part of that space and to really live into what I had found in my research, the theories that I developed, which is this idea of, I call it queer utopian musicking,
Mm.
which is where we live into this utopian world, this utopian ideal of what can we be? What is the fullest potential of human love and attraction and expression and living? what is the full capacity, and what does it feel like to be in a space where nothing about us is assumed and we can be whatever we are without fear, without judgment, and we can live into that world musically
Mm,
by the musical choices we make and by the way we express ourselves and connect with our community. By performing, we live into this world that we are co-creating.
mm. Ah,
And I
that's
think
so wonderful.
music has an incredible power to co-create. We have the ability to imagine what kind of world we want to live in and practice together being in relationship.
Mhm.
Now I'm just ripping off Christopher Small.
Hey, it's a good they're all very good and important points to be making. It's interesting because and as people who have been in slash are currently a part of the post-secondary music world,
Mm-hmm.
there's very much the stereotype of there being a very high queer population in music programs. A stereotype that has not been proven wrong yet. Um,
Absolutely.
and just, the huge amounts of queer and trans people get that I get to make music with in my degree is wonderful and beautiful. But, you can't help but wonder if the reason why there are so many out queer people in these music programs isn't that more queer people do music programs than any other degree. It is that more queer people feel safe exploring themselves and comfortable being
Mm-hmm.
open in
Yeah,
that degree than others.
absolutely. And part of being a musician and being in music is learning how to own your space and take up space, be assertive, and be creative and with your own agency. And I think it's hard to do that and hide who you are.
Mhm.
It's hard to be a musician. It's hard to bring your authentic self to the music you are doing while hiding a part of who you are.
Mhm.
And from the very get-go, music has always been very queer and very camp, and speculations go all the way back about, ooh, what relationships did these composers have, and ooh, what was this person doing, and what were these performers doing, and the speculation goes all the way back to the beginning of recorded music history, and
Mhm.
it has always been a place for people on the margins to take up space and tell their stories in a way that can be heard.
Mhm.
And this is something that many wonderful people have written a lot of really wonderful things about. But I do think it is really important for us to think about is, are we as music educators creating the space for people to bring their entire authentic selves and all of their cultural knowledge and experience and have that authenticity in their music? Actually, I want to shout out a colleague of mine who is in community music with me, who really revamped how she was doing music education in her classroom. She's a public school teacher, and she said, okay, how do I make this more tangible and more relevant and more culturally competent? And so one of the things she did was, instead of having pictures up of all of the different instruments of the orchestra in her music room, she took all those down and said to her classes, I want you to bring in pictures of instruments that mean a lot to you and your family. And she said she was amazed at all of these different instruments that people brought in. And so she would laminate these pictures and put them up on the walls. And so she's got tabla and eru and indigenous like hand drums, Anishinaabe hand drums, and all kinds of other things, sitars, and all of these fantastic instruments. And lots of people have, guitars or violin or piano, because these instruments are still very important to a lot of people, obviously. But it
Mhm.
created room for authenticity, for pride, and for mutual recognition.
Wow, that is so
And
fantastic.
that's just one of the many examples of very cool things this particular person has done, and so many there are so many amazing music educators who are creating those spaces, who are moving away from this predominantly Western top-down mode of thinking about music education, where it's like the student doesn't have anything to bring to me.
Mm-hmm.
And it's the recognition of like, oh, there are cultural competencies here that I lack.
Mm-hmm.
Part of her motivation for the research she did for her project, she said, in my school board, there is not a single music educator. Like in the public school system, there's not a single music educator who isn't white.
Mm.
Every single one of us, and granted, there's not many of them.
Right.
It's like, but every single one of us is white.
Mm-hmm.
And so what, that's not a bad thing, but it's what perspectives are we then lacking?
Mm-hmm.
And what knowledge is being lost? And if you're teaching K-8 music, there's a very, very good chance that your students are not going to have any other music education outside of what you give them.
Mm-hmm.
And that is a tremendous, tremendous responsibility. And so she says, how do I give my students the best picture of what music is and what music looks like around the world and for each other?
Wow, that's so fantastic. And it's a perfect segue into one of my questions that you've absolutely already answered really well, but I'd love to pick your brain on even more if you're willing,
Yeah.
is how do you think that, like, we as in you and I, but we as sort of the collective of people who are passionate about music listening to this, can make music education and music making more accessible to more young people or just more people in general?
So I've been thinking about this question a lot, and I want to tie it back to what I was talking about at the beginning, which is spiritual education and learning music in church. Um, this is something I've noticed as a music teacher. I can tell immediately when someone comes into my studio if they grew up participating in a community that makes music non-professionally. Like if they are around adults who participate in music even though that's not something that they necessarily do, quote unquote. And what I mean by that is kids who go to church, who have their parents singing hymns, and they have experience with following along the words on a page and looking at symbols and going, okay, those mean something and those connect to these words somehow. And oh, these lines mean something. And or even if they're just looking at the screen, they can understand that, okay, there's a rhythm, there's a cadence, there's a way that we say these things. Or if they go to temple or synagogue, like if they participate in music making with their family and with their community, immediately I can tell, because they
Interesting.
are 10 steps ahead of every other kid their age
Mm-hmm.
in terms of their musical competency right off the bat. And the thing
Wow.
and the thing I think it's important to recognize is that it's free.
Mm-hmm.
If you are getting music education in these spiritual places, it's free. And I cannot think of anywhere else aside from the classroom where kids get free music education. Like
Right.
I benefited immensely from music lessons and youth choir and band camps and all of these different things, or all of these extracurriculars where we did music. And I know they do singing and Girl Guides and Boy Scouts, and like all of these different spaces have music incorporated in them, but there is a paywall.
Mm-hmm.
And so I think one of the things we need to be really clear on is what music opportunities exist outside of the schools for free music education.
Right.
And whether that be, I've been working this past summer for a group called Bandology, and we run a band camp. And I was super, super grateful that we were able to offer really generous subsidies to kids who needed it.
Mm-hmm.
And that's hugely, hugely important. It's just like giving that opportunity, giving that education and those opportunities to kids who would never, ever otherwise be able to afford it. And I think there needs to be more government funding to support music educators. I don't think that's a controversial statement anywhere in Canada, really.
I think I would agree with that statement.
Yeah. But there's always a need for more funding and more education, of course. But I think investing in music education, especially coming out of the pandemic, Lord knows I know how devastated music education programs have been over the last 3 years. And I think there really needs to be money made available through corporate sponsorship. Like if there are businesses in the community who want to really invest and want to see the next generation of musicians thrive, donate to your local public schools to make sure that they've got, like they've got a new keyboard that functions, or, support their choir trip. But yeah, like just providing those free opportunities to kids, making low cost options available. That's something that, I'm a private teacher, so I charge by the hour, but I have sliding scale options available. I do in-kind work where I can. I've got to pay my bills, but I do try to prioritize. I'm like, yeah, access to music is a fundamental human right, and we shouldn't just, like, music is so important to everyone. Everyone can name, their favorite band or the most incredible concert that they've been to, and how important music is in pretty much everyone's lives. I know there's some people out there who don't listen to music and don't find music that important in their lives. Can't relate, but they exist. They should
Not
be
many of them, though.
But pretty much there's a reason that Taylor Swift is made $1 billion on the Eras tour.
Yeah.
And I think we all have a right to participate in music making, not just as passive consumers of music, but also as active participants and co-creators. Even if that's, you and a ukulele covering a Taylor Swift song in your basement, or you on stage singing a Bach aria, we all have a right to co-create and leave our mark and interpret music in a way that is meaningful for us.
That's beautiful.
And that's my kind of guiding philosophy about music education is, how do we make this accessible and how do we make this meaningful?
I feel like I almost feel silly asking this because I feel like you've answered it already very eloquently in multiple of your answers. But if you, and I'm sure you have been in the past faced with someone who doesn't understand the benefit of studying music or participating in community music, and what would you say, or what do you say to that person who just doesn't get it?
I don't think we need to look hard for people who don't understand the benefit of studying music, because it comes up in every budget meeting at every school board. Why are we paying for music? Why do we need to pay for the tuba to get repaired? Why do we need to pay for the piano to be tuned? Why do we need soundproof paneling? Because I get it. Music is a lot more expensive than a math class.
Yeah.
I totally understand, but also the tangible benefits you see from music education, like I'm gonna shout out Bandology again, the company I work for. Bandology was started by a group of parents who noticed, wait a second, there is a big correlation between the kids who are participating in the music program and the kids who are on the honor roll. And obviously there is a certain amount of, like, people who have opportunities to succeed in music tend to come from wealthier backgrounds and thus will have more support in their education. There is an element of that. But also music is a massively important part of learning collaboration, learning to work together effectively. The most effective coworkers I've ever had are musicians, because we all know the importance of everybody putting in your fair share of the work, because otherwise it all falls apart. But as I say, the best collaborators I've worked with are musicians. Musicians understand discipline. We understand working at something that is challenging until you can overcome it, until you can find success. We have, as I say, discipline. We have collaboration, we have a different kind of awareness, we have a very different way of understanding the world and connecting to the world. We look for patterns in very different ways. And are these not valuable skills?
Mm-hmm.
I mean, you know, and I say this as I am also a firm believer in art for art's sake.
Mm-hmm.
Art does not need to justify its existence. We make art because we are human. Why does the elephant trumpet its horn? Why does the baboon climb the tree? Why does the snake slither through the sand? Why does the human sing? It is because it is fundamentally part of our human existence
Mm-hmm.
to create joyful pattern, to find the patterns in the chaos of life and make them beautiful. That is a fundamentally human endeavor, and music does that in an incredibly beautiful way. And so does dance, and so does drama, and so does visual art, like all of these key parts of the arts curriculum that are always begging for scraps of funding.
Mm-hmm.
And we shouldn't need to justify our existence because our existence is innately human.
Mm-hmm. That's so lovely. That's beautiful. And I could not agree more. I know it was a big thing that came up in a lot of the I'll drink to that. It was a big thing that
I'm
came up.
drinking water.
Hydration's important. Um, but it was a big thing that came up a lot in like some of my music education courses where, so often you'll see all these studies that are all about how, oh, students who do music are better at math and they're better at science and they score better on, their standardized testing. And it's like, yeah, that is probably true and that's great. But, even if that weren't true, students should still be allowed to study music and should still have the opportunities to study music in the same way that they have the opportunities to go to the mathathon and the spelling bee because it's something that they're
Or play
passionate about and they want to
sports.
learn about or play sports.
Yeah, absolutely. And, there's all kinds of physical benefits, and that's something that I've got to say shout out to the people who work in public education because I am tangentially related to public education. I do go in and I do school visits. I work with teachers. I help them develop their voice programs. And shout out to all of you. I love you all. But and that's a huge honor for me. But I remember being told by someone who worked in public education in music for many many years. She said, keep track of everything and have a binder of everything you do and every student success and everything that students ever say to you. Keep track of everything because every single year you will need to fight for your right to exist. Every single year they will try and whittle away more and more and more of your program, and you are going to have to fight and advocate for yourself every single time. And I know that's not true everywhere, and there are a lot of schools with really, really robust music education programs, and I love that. But we all know that that's not the case everywhere, that music
Mm-hmm.
education is deeply precarious in a lot of places.
Mm-hmm.
And that music educators are not valued for the skills they are worth. And it is deeply frustrating to constantly be having to fight for what we know is valuable.
Mm-hmm.
We know that kids benefit from this. We know that adults benefit from this. We know that communities benefit when their kids are able to express themselves, to be creative, to channel all of these big feelings of adolescence into creative endeavors. We know that that is a tangible benefit.
Mm-hmm.
We know that communities thrive when there are community arts through which they can navigate life.
Mm-hmm.
And it's so important, and it's deeply deeply frustrating to have to fight against governments that do not value education, period,
Mm-hmm.
but also especially do not value music education.
I'm sure that you have had many, many of these moments with students of yours and peers of yours. But for those listening, for those watching, uh, if you could tell one thing to young musicians who are maybe actively studying music or making music for fun or participating in a community ensemble or lessons, what would that thing be, or things?
Well, first of all, I would say music can be a part of your life in whatever capacity you choose. I know a lot of my students who really struggle with, like, oh, I want to, they're doing the same thing I did. I want to do science, I want to do music. And I think that music would always have been a part of my life, regardless of what I ended up doing at school. I
Mhm.
just as science is still a huge part of my life, and I love reading all of the latest juicy updates about, ooh, what have they discovered in, laryngeal science and muscular vocal function and all of these fun things. Science is still very much a part of my life, and music is still a part of my life. I'm going on a bit of a tangent, but what I mean is, you don't have to choose.
Mhm.
Music can be a part of your life in whatever capacity you choose. If you do decide to pursue music, amazing. The music world in Canada is the size of a literal postage stamp, so I'm sure we will run into each other, and I look forward to that day. But your career is going to be DIY.
Mhm.
You can go into music education, you can go into performance, you can go into administration, you can go into production, you can go into mixing, you can go into private teaching. There is absolutely no limit to what you can do with a music degree. And a lot of us have side hustles, or a lot of us are doing music as our side hustle. That doesn't make us any less professional musicians. And every single musician I know cobbles together a career out of like 15 different side hustles. Um, but it's incredibly joyful, and there's an incredible amount of flexibility that you might not expect and that you might not necessarily see in your education program. You might think, well, performance or teaching, those are the only two tracks. Absolutely not. That is so not true. There are so many options. So be curious, investigate, ask questions. Oh, okay, this is the biggest thing. Do not be afraid to network.
Yeah.
Yeah, go make friends. Even if you think like, oh my gosh, why would that person literally ever want to talk to me? I am a actual child. I am a high school student. I am terrified. Go talk to people. Ask questions. If you see someone doing some cool stuff, be like, hey, how did you do that? How did you end up here? How did this happen? How did you put this together? Go ask questions, because that's how I learn everything cool that I have ever known. And so much of a music career is a friend that you met like 3 years ago calling you up and saying, hey, so I just got a grant to do this thing, and do you want to be involved?
Yeah.
That is actually how I get a good percentage of my jobs.
Incredible.
It's a lot of fun, as I say. Oh, and the other thing, learn how to do taxes as a freelancer.
Oh, I guess.
Just like just like get comfortable. Actually, I'm gonna say this quite seriously. Get comfortable looking at money. Get comfortable understanding money and developing a good relationship with money, because as much as I hate to say it, none of us are making bank here.
Fair.
This isn't a lucrative industry. And as I say, you're going to be, unless you get a full time education job or a full time performance gig, not that that ever happens. But as I say, you're going to be cobbling together a bunch of different careers. You're going to be cobbling together a lot of different work. So you learn how to keep track of your income, learn how to keep track of all of the different things you are doing. And I have ADHD. I know the struggle. I know it's hard. Do it. Get good at it while you're in school. Get good at it while you are young, so that you don't make major financial mistakes when you are older and the CRA is going to come pounding down your door and going, pay us the money you owe. Just don't do it. But that is one major piece of advice I would give. Your tax situation is going to be wacky. Learn as much as you can and ask everyone, hey, how do you do your taxes, and what software do you use? I realize that might be a bit of a long way off for a 15-year-old, but
But
genuinely, it is the best piece of advice I could give you.
hey, for the amount of 15-year-olds who post on Tumblr that they wish school would teach them useful things like how to do their taxes,
Learn how to do your
you can learn how to
taxes.
do it yourself. That's what the internet's for.
Ask your family, ask your friends, ask your teachers, ask anyone who's in a career similar to you. How do you do your taxes? Don't have any shame about it. Just ask the question. It is weird
Very,
and complicated, and no one really understands.
yeah, but very good advice to live by, so thank you.
Yeah, no one ever wants to talk about the money piece,
Mm-hmm.
but like, get comfortable talking about the money piece. Oh, and also, there are 3 reasons to accept work: good people, good pay, good project.
Mm-hmm.
Those are the 3 reasons you should do work.
Mm-hmm.
I have done a lot of free work in my time, but the project is fun and the people are awesome. So that makes it worth it. Or I've done projects that have been like, oh man, this is like not a great time, but the people were great and the pay was worth it. If it's only one of those 3, walk away. If it's 2 out of 3, great. If it's 3 out of 3, say
Perfect.
yes. Stay there forever.
Never ever let go.
Never let them go. But genuinely, like, keep in mind the 3 P's, because as I say, talking about the money piece, no one really wants to talk about the money thing, and that makes it a lot easier to get away with not paying you what you're worth.
Mm-hmm.
Know your worth as a musician, as an educator, as a clinician, as whatever your skill set is, whatever people are asking you to do. Know your worth and ask for what you are worth. Sometimes people genuinely do not have the budget to pay you, and that's okay. Maybe you can work out an in-kind situation. Maybe you can say, like, okay, I can do this one for free, but I'm not able to commit to a long-term unpaid commitment. Um, but be very, very clear with your financial boundaries and do not work for no benefit. The
Mm-hmm.
benefit can be you're making really good connections and it's a really cool project to have on your resume. That's a great reason to do something.
Mm-hmm.
But know your boundaries, know your worth, and don't be afraid to talk about how much you're getting paid for stuff.
True.
Be transparent. We all benefit. We all benefit from that.
Yes, absolutely. Well, speaking of projects and things, is there anything that you're either a part of right now or something that is on the horizon for you that you're really excited about?
Oh my gosh, so many things. Well, first of all, as you say, I run a private studio, and I teach online. So even if you're not in the Guelph or KW area and you are looking for a very cool affirming voice teacher, hit me up. You can find me on Facebook and Instagram if you search Emily Steers Music. That's Steers. Look me up and come check me out. You can also find me on emilysteers.com. And I am always happy to take on more voice students. I've got room in my studio right now, and I would love to see you there.
Yay.
Um, and also, I am singing The Governess with Grand River Opera's production of Turn of the Screw this October. So if you're in KW or you're in Guelph at the end of October, please come check it out. It's going to be a phenomenal production. And I'm very, very excited about this initiative to set up more community opera, more local homegrown opera, and it's going to be absolutely phenomenal.
Yeah.
And I think that's everything. There are of course other things in the works, as always, because I wear so many different hats. But those are the major projects that I can think of for the time being.
That's really cool. That's so exciting. Turn of the Screw is one of my favorite operas right now, so that's
It's
really, really
so
exciting.
good. It's so good. I am digging into all of the score study right now. I am having so much fun. It's such beautiful music. I love it.
Yeah, and so scary. So really genuinely scary.
It's a ghost story. We're performing it at Halloween, so come check it
Ooh.
out.
A little fun question before we wrap up. What are you listening to right now, aside from Turn of the Screw, or what musicians are you into
Oh,
right
yeah,
now?
I am in score study mode. I'm listening to the Turn of the Screw audiobook, the Turn of the Screw cast recordings. Um, I'm going to see Hadestown this week.
Oh, wow.
I've listened to bits of it, but I've never listened to the whole thing, so I'm very excited about that. I'm fully anticipating that becoming my entire personality. Aside from that, I am very much enjoying Rina Sawayama's music. I've been listening to that a whole bunch, and I highly recommend. Oh, yes, and the Tears of the Kingdom soundtrack.
Yeah.
I love video game music, man. It's so nice.
It's great. Some of it's so, so good.
Absolutely. Yeah, hey, there's another career path for you. Getting involved in music production in video games. Whoa, that's a whole massive area of expertise that is incredible to me.
And just because you've mentioned like your studio and the opera you're going to be in, is there any social media accounts you want to plug or websites or anything?
Yes, as I said before, Emily Steers Music on Instagram. I think I'm Emily Steers Soprano on Facebook and emilysteers.com. Oh, and one more project. I am kicking off a youth handbell choir at my
Oh,
church, Dublin Street United Church, for any of you in the Guelph area who want to get your kids, or heck, even yourselves, into handbell ringing. It's gonna be a good time. I'm very excited. We're kicking this project back up. It kind of disappeared over the pandemic because so did everything else. But we're bringing it back. And so if you love handbells and you want to come learn about handbell ringing, come hang out with me. It's going to be a good time. And as I said, church music, it's free.
yeah.
So it's a good time. Come check it out. And I look forward to connecting with you and hearing from you all. Thank you so much for listening, everybody. And thank you so much for supporting music education in Canada.
Yeah. And thank you so much. It's been really great chatting with you, Emily. I mean, it's always a joy chatting with you. It has been way too long, but this was an extra special joy.
It's a nice excuse to catch up with friends. It's just like, hey, come be on my podcast.
And thank you, listeners and watchers, for turning into Music for All, a coalition for music education in Canada podcast. I have been Christina. She has been Emily Steers, and here's hoping you add a little music to your life today. Goodbye. Thanks to our major funder, the NOM Foundation, as well as to our major sponsors, Yamaha, Long & McQuaid, and Cosmo Music. Please check out the Coalition for Music Education in Canada at coalitioncanada.ca. That's coalitioncanada.ca to find out more about us. Thank you.